And we're back on the Morgan Streetman Show. So much to get into already that we didn't get a chance to do our quick look back or our local interest story. So let's take that quick look back. And what we want to talk about today, you know, Morgan, when you think about people who are actually, they get that headline news of, okay, Russia interfered with the DNC and the server.
Right. Russia hacked our election.
Right. If you ask most people that, then they would say, yes, of course that happened. Mm-hmm. But there's a little bit more to it than that.
Well, there is. I mean, but the media has repeated it over and over and over again. And if you'll remember, the Russian interference in the election was, say, Russia hacked our democracy. That's what the headline is, right? And they've said it so many times that, frankly, most of us believe it's true because we've just heard it so many times. And as we try to tell you on this show, you need to remember that in the mind of propagandists, a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. Mm-hmm. So if they just keep telling it to you and CNN just keeps just filling your brain with the noise, eventually it brainwashes you. That's brainwashing. That's what it does. It reprograms the way you think about something by overwhelming you with false data. So we've heard Russia hacked our election now for, years we've been hearing that. Basically, ever since Donald Trump came into office, when he was inaugurated, it started at around that time. And if you remember, President Obama, before Trump was even inaugurated, put sanctions onto Russia for interfering in our election. So that was kind of the initial maneuver, and that's where the story started. Well, what we've come to learn was what we knew all along, and that is that the story is false. There were two pieces, and we've talked about both pieces extensively to this whole Russian hacking claim. The first piece was that Russian troll farms based out of Macedonia, which is Greece, by the way, Russian troll farms ran all of these Facebook memes, and that changed everybody's mind. Now, remember, this is something they spent, and we don't have the exact numbers, but we do have congressional testimony that we've played before of it being like, in the $5,000 range is what they spent on Google and less than $10,000 on Facebook. So let's just round up and give them the benefit of the doubt. But say they spent something less than a total of $50,000 on this campaign. Now, if that's enough to sway an election, why did Hillary Clinton lose? Right? Hillary Clinton had raised a billion, not 50,000, $1 billion. And by the way, you can go out and you can find these memes that were posted. They're not that impressive. They're really not impressive at all. They're not issue specific. They're just generalized memes. I encourage people to go out there and look at them. You cannot trust the media characterizations of these situations. You can't just take the media's word for it. Go look for yourself. You're an intelligent person. You've at least got some common sense. All of us are capable of evaluating these things for ourselves. And we've to a degree, seem to have lost that. We say, I don't know. I got to go with what the experts say. No, you don't. You don't have to go with what the experts say. You're a free person. You have the right to go and look at the information and decide for yourself what you think about it. And that's what I want you to do. I want you to go out there and go look up these memes that were posted. And you come back and you tell us, give us a call and tell us if you think that would have swayed you in any way.
You've looked at them.
I've looked at them a bunch of times. We've talked about them, in detail on the show, what the memes are, what the posts say. If you think this swayed the election, you've got a terrible disrespect for the American voter, number one. Number two, I don't understand why Hillary couldn't have employed the same strategy. This is not complicated stuff. But again, we get this narrative that the Russians, they're like magicians. It may look stupid what they're doing, but you just don't understand how powerful they really are. They're fooling everybody. They even got you fooled. You looked at this and you think it's nothing, but they've changed the entire country's mind using $50,000 or less funded through a Macedonian troll farm. How can you not see this? How can you not understand, right? You're stupid. That's how they treat you. That's how the media treats us and how they treated us for 3 years about this. Okay, that was one piece of the Russians hacking our election. The other piece of the Russians hacking our election mythology is that the Russians hacked the DNC server. They broke into the DNC server and stole the emails, and then they published those emails through WikiLeaks. And that turned the entire, because people actually saw how these DC insiders like John Podesta and Hillary Clinton operate. Yeah, it was a stomach-turning experience to see how they actually operate behind the scenes. But here's the thing. The Russians didn't hack those emails. That's the thing. And they never had any evidence that they did. And that's what we've been telling you for 3 years. We've told you that for 3 years. There are actual professionals, a long time, probably the most decorated NSA analyst in the history of the National Security Agency, Bill Binney. We've told you about him at length. He was Edward Snowden in October of 2001. He was Snowden before Snowden was cool. Before Snowden was a thing, there was a guy who blew the whistle back in October 2001. Now, he did it through the proper channels, so he didn't do what Snowden did, which, is generally considered not to have gone through the channels, although that's a more complicated story, but let's just try to stick to it here. But Bill Binney, he blew the whistle internally and resigned because he would not stand for the program that he created being turned and used against United States citizens domestically. That was not what he created, the electronic monitoring program that was used in the rest of the world. He didn't create it for domestic use. He believed that violated the Constitution. It so plainly does. And he resigned in protest and would not continue with that. But the guy is a very skilled NSA analyst and mathematician. He writes code, ciphers. I mean, he's a genius. And he's looked at the data related to the documents stolen from the DNC. And because of the speed at which the documents are saved, he can tell that that was done via a local transfer. What does that mean? That means somebody plugged a thumb drive, most likely, into the computer and moved the files from the computer onto the thumb drive. And we even know who that person was, we think. We have, as the NSA might say, we have a high degree of confidence that we know who that person was. It was a person named Seth Rich, who was objecting to the fact that the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign, which had merged together, the campaign had taken over the party, were actively working to deny Bernie Sanders the chance at the nomination. That's why the emails were exfiltrated or taken out of the DNC, was to show that that was what was going on. All right, so that's what Seth Rich did. But if we listen to the mainstream media for the last 3 years, that was a Russian hack. Why couldn't that have happened? Because the transfer speeds for this data being taken out of the DNC, what they call exfiltrated, the transfer speeds over the internet are much slower. So you would be able to tell by the exact timestamp on the file how fast it had been moved off and created. And if you've ever downloaded a big file over the internet, you get a sense of what I'm talking about. It doesn't happen instantaneously. Whereas if you plug a thumb drive in and you just drag and drop it, it moves right over and you can unplug the thumb drive right away. And those files are created very quickly because the process of transferring them doesn't take very long. All right, so now let's get into it because we've talked around it quite a bit. So what has come out in the past couple of weeks? You remember there were those 53 or maybe it was 57, I think it was 53 transcripts that were released. Now, they were released by Adam Schiff, but only under threat of being released by Rick Grinnell, the Director of National Intelligence. And those were the transcripts from the House investigations into all of these issues around the mythology that Russia hacked our election. And there's one transcript in particular that came out, and it's a transcript from an interview, sworn testimony that occurred in December of 2017 before the House Intelligence Committee. And the interview was of Sean Henry, who was the CEO of CrowdStrike. He was also the lead investigator for the forensic analysis of the DNC server. Now, what did he say? Just to sum it up, he said that they did not have any evidence that Russia took the emails. That's the summary. I'm going to read to you the actual quotes from it, but that's the summary of what he testified to. So they've known about this. They've known that the guy that ran the forensic analysis said they don't have any evidence. They've known that since December of 2017. But all in the interim, all during the meanwhile, we've had guys like Adam Schiff going on TV and saying, look, you haven't seen all the evidence that I've seen. I know there's serious, solid evidence that President Trump colluded with the Russians. Well, we now know, years later, that that was a lie because no evidence has come out. If they had even a shred of it, we would have seen it. It would have been front and center at the impeachment hearings that we just went through earlier this year, right? I mean, we would have seen this evidence from Adam Schiff. He was the lead person prosecuting the impeachment. Well, it was him and Nadler, and they were kind of fighting for control. But I'd say if you watch the impeachment, Adam Schiff was the Democrats' lead guy. He was the lead prosecutor for the impeachment, and he never showed us this evidence that he supposedly had. Well, now we have confirmation that he knew, just as like we told you, just like we knew, based on what Bill Binney told us and what we could tell from that the Russians, there's no evidence that they hacked the DNC. Now, I'm going to go through some of these quotes for you just to kind of highlight what he actually said. But understand, the summary is accurate. CrowdStrike has no evidence. In fact, nobody has any evidence that the Russians hacked the DNC server. And that's really all there is to the story.
We're back on the Morgan Streetman Show and learning that, guess what? It didn't happen. Russia didn't interfere with the election. Or I shouldn't say that. I should say Russia didn't compromise DNC server.
Right. Well, if you've been listening to this show and if you trust us, if you take what we say and incorporate it into your own thought process, you may already have come to this conclusion because we concluded this years ago and we've been reporting on it, the analysis that we've done internally on this years ago, that this did not occur. And we've showed you the evidence. We've showed you the interviews. We showed you the interview where Julian Assange essentially said that he got the data from Seth Rich. Julian Assange is WikiLeaks, right? So he said he got the data from a source that he couldn't reveal, and it could be Seth Rich. If you remember that interview, I don't have the clip handy, but I mean, he pretty well said it was Seth Rich if you read between the lines. But we're sharing with you now that all of the folks involved in this, in the government side, from the House Intelligence Committee, all the impeachment managers, all those people knew back in December of 2017 that the group that investigated this CrowdStrike didn't find anything. So I'm going to read you some quotes. This is from the CEO of CrowdStrike and the lead investigator on this forensic investigation, Sean Henry. And he said, quote, "We did not have concrete evidence that the data was exfiltrated from the DNC, but we have indicators that it was exfiltrated." Exfiltrated just means taken out of or removed from, right? So we didn't have concrete evidence that the data was removed from the DNC, but we have indicators that it was removed. Okay, well, what does that mean? Indicators that it was removed? Well, he says, quote, "There are times when we can see data exfiltrated, and we can say conclusively. But in this case, it appears it was set up to be exfiltrated, but we just don't have the evidence that it actually left." Oh, that's interesting, because maybe it didn't leave out over the network, like we've said. Maybe it left out by being transferred to a thumb drive. All right, here's another quote for you. "There's not evidence that they were actually exfiltrated. There's circumstantial evidence, but no evidence that they were actually exfiltrated." No evidence. Here's another one. "There's circumstantial evidence that the data was exfiltrated off the network. We didn't have a sensor in place that saw data leave. We said that the data left based on the circumstantial evidence. That was the conclusion that we made." Now, remember, this conclusion has been treated as though it was gospel, like it was backed up by evidence. This is true. This is what look, CrowdStrike looked at this. Remember, the FBI didn't even look at it. They just took CrowdStrike's word for it. Who is CrowdStrike, right? When did they become in charge? No, but you have to understand, they looked at it. Oh, okay. Here's another one. When he was asked directly if he could say unequivocally whether or not it was infiltrated out of the DNC, Sean Henry told the committee, "I can't say," based on that, based on the evidence that he'd seen. He can't say unequivocally that it was taken. Well, what does that sound like? Does that sound like proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Does that sound like proof of anything? Doesn't sound like there was even evidence of anything. And that is with respect to the Russians hacking. Now, meanwhile, at the same time now, we've got China actively threatening to hack our elections or to do something. And they've said basically based on what some American politicians have done, that they are not just going to strike back symbolically, but they will impose countermeasures that will make us feel pain. You know how the Chinese sometimes speak in their language. It's very sort of loaded up language.
So Russia was
almost
just a dress rehearsal then.
Yeah, that's right. Watch out now, for China's really coming. But they're specifically talking about people like Josh Hawley in Missouri, and I'm sure they're thinking about Tom Cotton, Senator Cotton in Arkansas, and they're saying we're going to target these people because they're trying to hold China responsible for coronavirus. They're trying to tell the truth about China, and we don't like that. So here's a quote. Quote, Republicans who have been groundlessly accusing China and inflaming the holding China accountable political farce will face severe consequences, sources said, noting that the aftermath will also impact the upcoming November elections, while business and trade between Missouri and China will be further soured. So that's a quote from the paper. And they're saying, the paper is saying its sources are reporting to it. Now, the paper is the Global Times in China, which, like all the media in China, is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. So you have the appearance of choice, the appearance of options. But at the end of the day, if you follow all the little media trails back to their source, they're all coming from the same place, the Chinese Communist Party. And sadly, that's very similar to what happens in this country when you start to trace all the different channels and sources back. Now, the one you can't trace back to some major corporation is the Morgan Streetman Show. We can assure you of that. But you trace a lot of these others back, all these big networks, and they're back to big corporations and big corporate conglomerates and interests. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.